Welcome everyone to the Center for Innovative Teachings forum on what is the point. This is a continuation of an earlier panel that we had last fall that examined the relationship between UMass Boston and Columbia Point, Harbor Point Housing. We've been neighbors now here on Columbia Point for 45 years, almost 46. And there's been a large amount of interchange and mutual influence that our panelists today actually know a great deal about because they're all people who have been here, moving back and forth, connecting us with the neighborhood that we're a part of here for decades. They have a lot to share, and thank you so much for being willing to participate. So my name is Tim Sieber, and I won't be I'll just be introducing some of the speakers as we move on. So our first speaker is Vice Chancellor for Athletics, Recreation, and Special Projects and Programs, and the Director of Athletics, Charlie Titus. Charlie, he grew up at Columbia Point. He later came back to work here at UMass. He's worked here now, I'm guessing it's been about 40 years, Charlie? 46. 46, oh my God. From the very beginning that the campus opened.
Well, I came with the buildings.
You came with the buildings, okay.
He held up better than they did.
So Mr. Titus built our athletic program here, and he achieved a lot of distinction for it. He built the athletic conference that we're a part of, the Little East. He and his the athletes in the program here have won so many awards for distinguished service programs that they've done in the community. Mr. Titus has also himself received an incredibly long list of awards. He's been inducted to 3 different athletics Hall of Fames, and has an amazing record of achievement and leadership here at UMass Boston. And he's cared a lot about the community and everything that he's done, and probably done more than anyone else here at this university to share resources that we have at UMass with people from the community. He opened up our facilities for decades now for use by local schools, youth groups, nonprofit organizations who have come here and later joined the university in different capacities. It's an honor to introduce Mr. Titus.
I don't know. Thank you. Thank you very much. Do I use this? Yeah. Thank you, Tim, for that nice introduction. One of the things I will say about acknowledgments and awards, while I appreciate them, they have a lot to do with longevity. So the older you get, the more likely it is you're going to get some type of recognition. I've been around a long time. As Tim said, I did grow up in Columbia Point Housing Project. My family was one of the first families to move to Columbia Point when it opened in 1952, I believe. But this peninsula has a long and rich history that goes back to long before Columbia Point, the housing project, was built. It actually goes back, well, probably before this, but to my knowledge, 1884, when that old thing out there that looks like a castle, the pump station was built. And it was a marvel of how to handle sewerage in modern times, those modern times. People came from all over the world to look at this pump house and how this city handled their sewer problems. And they put all the sewage there, and they let it rise to, I think, 35 feet. And they'd open up these gates, and gravity and high tide would come in and pull it out into the ocean, dumping all of our sewage into the ocean. That was progress back then, right? I think that what you're focused on is what's happened here. And what I'm supposed to talk about is our role in Columbia Point and working with the youngsters of Columbia Point through the athletic program. The campus did open in 1974. Now, I lived in Columbia Point from 52 through 64. From 52 through 64. And near the end of my time out there, when I first moved there, when we first moved there, I was very young. It was a nice place to live. There is a book about Columbia Point out. I don't know if any of you have read it, but it's a decent place to live. But it was a great place to live. It was about families. It was about supporting one another. It was a mixed race development without racial problems in the early days. As we moved into the 60s, racial problems began to come in. There was a racial division. Young Irish kids that I had hung out with in the late 50s, I became enemies with in the 60s, and we literally had physical fights against each other. As I look back on it, it was kind of a weird situation, but it's the way it happened. I think a lot of it was, in my opinion, what happened in Columbia Point as a housing development was this great urban experiment that was mishandled. I have no doubt about that. There were a series of housing acts in the U.S. that began in 1934. And each one of those acts, and I think there were about 10 of them, and they went right up to 1998. Each one of those acts were about creating public housing and better places to live for people. There was one statement that said we can end slums and ghettos by building public housing. And initially, public housing was not aimed at just poor people. It was aimed at middle-income people and families. I also should add that before Columbia Point was built, the housing project was built, there was a development that went actually along where the Bayside Mall, all that property is now, Fort McKay, which was an army barracks. And during World War II, they actually used that site to house prisoners of war. And when I lived in the Point, it had all been destroyed, and we used to play, we called it the Rocks, because it had all been destroyed, and the concrete was there, and they made like little tents out of concrete. We used to play over there. So all of that's part of the rich history of Columbia Point. In 1965, I believe it was, they opened up the Bayside Mall, and it was a terrific shopping center. And that was supposed to give the residents of the Point an opportunity to have shopping near them. You know, before that, the only shopping out here was First National, the Finest, which is over where that TV studio is, right next to the Boston Globe. The Boston Globe wasn't here in those days. So it was the housing project, it was Boston College High School, it was the First National shopping mart, and everything else you had to go off the peninsula to do. The train station was there, Columbia Station. There was a bus that ran from the station into the projects, but it didn't run all day, and it certainly didn't run into the evening. So if you missed the last bus, you were walking down to the projects, which wasn't a bad thing. Qasim Beach was part of our playground. I remember days clamming on Qasim Beach. Go to the beach, dig up clams, take them back, rinse them off, and boil them up. It was a different life. It was a simpler life. I felt fortunate in 1974, when I had an opportunity to come back to the campus, or to come back home, actually, to Columbia Point and work on the campus. That work really started in 1969, 68. While I was a college student, I spent some summers working for a construction guy who was a troubleshooter. And so they were behind on building the campus. And part of my job was to, I hate to tell you this because it didn't work out well, but part of my job was to put the ceiling along the foundation of the campus for the methane gas before they built the system to control the methane gas. That was my job. And I stayed with that company for a while, and one day the owner came and said, we're going to send you to Cambridge. And they sent me to Cambridge, and my job in Cambridge, they were building a new Mount Auburn hospital, and they said, you're going to go up and put ceiling all along the frame. I have acrophobia. I said, oh, no, I'm not going to do that. He said, oh, yes, you are. Here's my hard hat, I'm out. And so I went to social services. Construction wasn't for me. But having the opportunity to come back and work at the campus in 1974 with a focus on um, building a sports program for this university was a great opportunity for a guy who was 24 years old at the time, became the youngest basketball coach in college in the country at the time. It gave me an opportunity to be the youngest athletic director. When I became the athletic director here, I was the youngest athletic director at a major university at the time. I was the only African American athletic director in the Northeast when I became the athletic director here. So I've had an opportunity to have a lot of firsts in my life that have been meaningful as I moved along, all through my work here on this campus. One of the things, and I'm not going to go through the whole history of building athletic programs and that kind of stuff at this time, but one of the things that we did have an opportunity to do and we built right into our program from the beginning was community service. That evolved to the point where all of our teams were required to do at least one community service project every year. 18 sports teams required to do at least one community service project every year. What ended up happening, our student athletes loved the projects we were involved in so much that they began doing more and more. Right now, most of our teams do 4 or 5 community service projects every year. We have 3 or 4 division-wide projects. We have a project with the Pine Street Inn that runs throughout the year where our students go and they sort clothes, they cook meals, but they're there all year working with the Pine Street Inn. We have a project that runs throughout the year with Special Olympics where we do various events that culminate with a Special Olympics tournament on our campus in our gym. And it's a role reversal tournament where the student athletes come as fans. And so they cheer the Special Olympic kids as they're playing in the games. Very interesting situation. I think what really made our program work initially was the relationship with the students, the young kids, the young scholars at Harbor Point. Remember, this campus was built, and so you probably you've been here and you see this very beautiful new campus that looks out over the city and over the ocean, and it's magnificent. When the campus was initially built, all the buildings faced inward. It was like a prison. And the message was, community, you weren't welcome. That's essentially the message. One of the things that we found, and the kids used to come in the gym and they play, and that was fine with me as long as there were no problems, and there weren't any problems. And then one day, one of the youngsters came. Actually, I saw him up at the station, and I said, "Man, you haven't been in the gym in a while." He said, "I can't come." I said, "Why not?" The police put a trespassing warrant out on me. They did what? They put a trespassing warrant out on me. Now, up until that point, our program with kids in Harbor Point had been pretty informal. Come in the gym when the gym's open, have yourself a good time, hang out with some of our student athletes. We did some role modeling and that kind of stuff, and it was working. What I found is that in those days, there was a campaign to keep those kids off this campus. So it was clear to us that we had to formalize the relationship. And so we developed a community membership program where community members could come and buy a membership to the athletic center, get an identification card. Youngsters could come and buy a membership. Their membership in those days was $20 a piece. A lot of those kids did not have $20. So what we decided to do is that we gave them an option. If you don't have the $20, you can work off your membership. And so we put them to work in the gym. And that seemed to work well. Now, I will tell you this, and I swear that this has a lot to do with the program we have with the youngsters from Columbia Point. On this campus in those days, you did not see graffiti. You didn't see broken windows. You didn't see that kind of damage. Those youngsters had a sense of community and a sense of belonging. We had a gentleman in our division, Rodney Hughes, who became like a second father to most of those youngsters in Columbia Point. They loved him. Some of those people are sitting at this table who grew up out there and know their program well. So, if something happened, we knew who the key kids were. We could call them in and say, "Look, this has to be resolved. Get it done." I remember once there was a big fight in the gym, And I called in two of the kids and said, look, that's it. I'll shut it down. I want to know how it started, when it started, and I want you to bring me the people who were involved. The next day, there were 6 kids in my office. That was an unbelievable relationship we had. Those youngsters knew that we cared about them. They still know that today. I think the other person that I have to mention who was critical in developing the relationship between our athletic department, the youth of Harbor Point, and Columbia Point, and the residents was Bernie Snead. Bernie grew up in Columbia Point. Actually, Bernie and I grew up at the same time. We were the same age. And Bernie stayed. Bernie got a bachelor's degree from here, UMass Boston. In those days, we had community offices. Actually, we had a community office in Columbia Point, and we had a community office out in Savin Hill. Bernie became the coordinator of the community office at Columbia Point, and he was amazing in that role, absolutely amazing. He had that nice, low-key, laid-back personality, right? And he would always be kind of soft, and he would try and be persuasive, but he was no one to be messed with, trust me. And so Bernie helped build that relationship. He made it work, and he was absolutely critical in forming the partnerships that sort of were sustained over a number of years with academic components, with the athletic department, and the rest of the university. I think my 5 minutes might be up. I'm going to stop there, and I'd be happy to answer any questions as we move along later in the program. Thank you very much.
Well, it's a pleasure to introduce as our next speaker on the panel, Stephanie Williams. She works here at UMass now as the administrator of the anthropology department, but she knows UMass very well. She grew up in Columbia Point, and her sister still lives there. Her family has lived there, and she's been going there for 50 years. She also came to UMass as an undergraduate. She went to CPCS. She received the degree, the bachelor's degree in legal studies. And she's also done graduate level certificate programs here in dispute resolution and also in women, politics, and public policy, and has a master's degree in urban studies from Boston University. She has worked a lot of her life as a paralegal and legal advocate for people in the community. She's held lots of positions on community boards and with the Boston branch of the NAACP that have defended people and their right to stay in place, their right to have their housing. And it's a real privilege to have her speak today. Thank you.
Good afternoon. And thank you. It was a pleasure meeting you and hearing you speak. You spoke about a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about. But I am a longtime resident of Columbia Point. We moved out in the 60s and also alumni of UMass Boston. And like he said, I currently work for anthropology, which is a blessing to be back home. Columbia, UMass, for me, has been a big part of my professional journey and an integral part of my personal growth. It's positively impacted my professional development and networking opportunities and my community relationships that I've established over the years. While a student here at UMass, I took advantage of the Women in Community Development Program, which we call the WICKED program, which was the Women in Community Development Program changing the tradition from poverty to leadership. And it was part of the CPCS program. And so I just want to kind of talk about that, my experience and that relationship with Columbia Point and UMass. The program had collaborated with Project Hope and the Women's Institute for Housing and Economic Development. And so as a prior resident of Columbia Point, you know, I tried to stay connected to the community by being as active as I could in the community and also like volunteering on the board of directors with the Harbor Health Services. Me and Gwennett Santos are both board of directors. And so I continued to keep that community connection going. And I just wanted to step back for a while. I also want to pay tribute and also give recognition to Bernice Snead because back in the early, I'd say the late 70s, we moved out in the 60s. He gave me my first state job here at UMass. I worked in the registrar's office for a short while, back in the early, I think, 80s. And, he was very influential in trying to connect the community with UMass, which is what we needed. But unfortunately, when Bernie got sick, I don't know what happened. Things kind of went by the wayside. But he was he was really good at connecting community, and he was really good at motivating me to be the person that I am today. As a single mother growing up in a place like Columbia Point, which was impoverished during that time, and a mother of children, I was always looking for ways not only to enhance or um, enhance my career, my career, my education, but to move my kids from poverty to a better living situation. I was always looking for educational opportunities for my children. So here on the campus, they had urban scholars. They had an urban scholar program. So I have two daughters that were in middle school that actually were in part of that program in the 90s. And I spoke with one of my daughters today, who's now in academia herself, who stated that her experience at Urban Scholar really prepared her educationally to go to high school, to even attend high school. And she, ended up going to an exam high school and going through college. And she said without that, she probably wouldn't have scored as high as she did or had the academic ability to move forward without that opportunity to be in a program like Urban Scholar. So highly recommended. Um, and she also stated that there weren't many people from the Columbia Point projects that were there with her. In the same way with me and the Wicked program, the women's program, not many people from the community were there. So we kind of thought about that. We were there, but where was everyone else? Did they have the same opportunities, and why weren't they there? Because it was definitely an opportunity. So we both recalled that there weren't many of the people from the projects here and taking advantage of these programs. So, and they were beneficial programs. So I personally believe that education is a tool necessary to transform anyone from poverty. And I tried to take advantage of it, being a resident, a longtime resident, and motivating others, family members and friends to, work on their education, to do whatever they can to remove themselves from poverty as much as they could. And I feel that an institution like this in our community is responsible for serving our communities. And I hope that they continue, meaning this institution continue to serve the surrounding communities with any services and programs they have to help the residents. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So Bernie Sneed, who everyone is talking about, was the director of what we used to call the UMass Boston Field Office, which they established there. And I didn't realize there was also one in Savin Hill, but we called it a field office, and it was a way that we could deliver and mobilize and deliver services, opportunities, information to people in the surrounding communities. There was a real sense that this university owed that to the people who lived around us, and we had a certain kind of debt to pay for coming into their community, especially a generally low-income community. And and that office disappeared a long time ago. Like has been said, probably by the 80s, it was gone, wasn't it? Early 90s, yeah. And we have continued our engagement in lots of other ways, but not through any kind of official offices of that sort. So thanks for remembering him. And I'd like to next introduce Damaris Calderon. Damaris is a student here at UMass Boston now, close to finishing her studies. She is a major in communication and in Africana studies, and is also a very community engaged, community service oriented kind of person. She has grown up in Harbor Point, and she still lives there. And I guess you live with your mother, right, Damaris? Yes. And let's welcome Damaris Calderon.
Hello, everyone. If you know me, you probably know me as Mars. That's my nickname since I started going to this school because you pronounce my name as Damaris, just so you know. And I like that you introduced me as a resident because that's me first and foremost. I do actually work in the Office of Residential Life right now, and that's basically like a work study position. But I wanted to reflect on I did some research before I came to this forum, and I was actually able to go on the Cochrane management site, which manages Harbor Point. And one quote that I found very funny was, "Our story is one of the people, partnerships, and success." I just want you all to pretty much take that in as we're having this discussion. A little bit about me. My family grew up in Dorchester their entire life. I'm like maybe a third or fourth generation. We grew up in the Dorchester area, Upham's Corner. I moved to Harbor Point when I was 6 years old. I never realized until I got to this school how embedded I am of this community. I got baptized at St. Christopher's Church. I was a member of the Boys and Girls Club with Queenie Santos, which is basically like an auntie. Everyone who grew up in Harbor Point knows who Queenie is. And now I'm going to school here where my uncle actually graduated from here, and my mother graduated from here. And now I'm going to be graduating from here. So this community is a big piece to who I am, and what I am trying to pursue in community engagement. Um, we're going to talk a lot about this relationship with UMass Boston and Harbor Point, but I think it's important to discuss about also how we can provide solutions to an ever-growing problem that we have right now, not only in our own UMass Boston community and Harbor Point, but also in the general metro area of Boston, where we're expanding so much and we're not serving the community that we are saying that we protect, right? So I think it's really important that everyone that's in this room realizes that these are real experiences, and that we come back to these communities, we come back to our friends and our family members, and we're struggling. So I just hope that everyone understands that I'm not here for a grade. I'm not here just to be here. I'm here because I'm trying to give a voice to the community that I serve. Thank you.
Okay. So our next and final two speakers. First of all, Joan Arches. Many of you have known Joan. She's been a professor here for a quarter century or more, and 24 years. And for 20 of those years, she's been very engaged with Harbor Point, and has been involved in a number of different programs that have put together UMass students with youth in Harbor Point in mentoring relationships and involving them in community projects. Some of you maybe have seen the mural that she did with a mixed group of UMass and community youth that's on the side of the McCormick School. A beautiful mural. It was just put up maybe 1 or 2 years ago. She wrote a grant to the city of Boston that funded that community initiative. And Joan has a lot to tell us, and she will introduce her collaborator and the next speaker to come, Ms. Santos.
Thank you. Can we get, I do have a PowerPoint because I'm a professor, and when I prepare to talk to people, I have to have PowerPoints. But I have some wonderful pictures as well, and I think those are the pieces you'll appreciate the most. And let me know if I'm loud enough. Usually that's not a problem. And I just want to start off by telling my own Bernice Sneed story, which brings us kind of full circle. I've been teaching at UMass for 24 years. all my background, my degrees are in social work and sociology. So I always take sociological theories and I attach them to real social problems. I bring people together and I try to build community. I hated school because I always felt it was not relevant to the real world and the communities in which I live. So I always try to provide opportunities for my students to connect with the community. So I'm always teaching service learning classes. And one year I was teaching a class called Interventions in Human Services, and I spoke with Queenie. We've been partners for years, and we'll tell you about that. She said, you know what would be great this year? If your students could work with some of the youth from the Boys and Girls Club to do community service themselves. And the Boston Home in Dorchester, which is a residential facility with people with neurological diseases, they are looking for young people to come in. So we planned a whole project where they were learning about disabilities. They were finding out what they could do to interact with residents. The UMass students were working with the preteens from Harbor Point. They'd go in there. And one of the young women in the program, who was probably about 10 then, who's an incredible person, her name was Marissa Snead, and she was a grand niece of Bernice Snead. Well, they went in there, and she's been working with our programs for years. They went into the Boston home. She hadn't seen her uncle in years. People did not know what happened to him. Well, Bernie had this neurological illness, and they found him living in the Boston home. So the youth from the Walter Denny Youth Center, the UMass students, were part of this incredible reunion and recognition of Bernie, and it felt like it all came full circle. So we are really indebted to him because, as I was going to say, I'm going to be talking today about what is the role of the university, how are we engaging, what do we know about the community that we're in, are we really in the community, are we of the community, are we for the community, what is our relationship, how are we connecting, and what is the point of those connections? Are we part of the problem or part of the solution? And if we're not part of the solution, what do we need to be doing to make us part of that? And I thought I would share some of my experiences with you, but I would like you all to just jot down anything you know about the institutions, organizations, agencies, people who live on this peninsula, who live, work, or learn on this peninsula, because it's a rich peninsula with all types of people and people doing working, living, and learning. And at the end, we can get back and talk about that. As Charlie mentioned, and I just briefly will go over this, Columbia Point opened in 1954 as public housing with about 3,000 people. By 1989, due to a number of issues of neglect by the city, things were not so great. There were only 350 residences there. There were issues with crime and drugs, but there was a very strong community of women and families who had community, who were building that community and did not want to see it destroyed, and were able to save the community and partnered with Corcoran Jennison to open up a new renovated Harbor Point, which is a mixed income private for-profit development with always at least 350 units to be available for low-income people. Since it opened, though, the issues that it was supposed to address were not really addressed. And there were always needs assessments which stated that particularly the young people on the peninsula needed opportunities for recreation, for education, for growth, and some of those are the ones that Charlie mentioned. The Columbia Point Association, which still exists, but which was more vibrant at different times in our history, were the people from all the different institutions on the point, and they would come together to look look at what were the issues and how could we make this a more vibrant community? How can we build on our strengths? They came up with the fact with identifying youth needs and always stressed the importance of the university and partnering. I came to UMass in 1994, and I was asked by Hubie Jones, who was then the assistant to the chancellor, and he was the vice chancellor for special affairs and urban affairs. And he had been approached by the owners of Harbor Point and the residents of the task force to look at what were the human service needs in the community, because the director of the youth center kept leaving. There was just a lot of issues. So Luisa Ponte Perez and I started 2 service learning classes, one in human services, one in community planning, and we spent a year doing research on former needs assessments, on the literature, on the history of the community, talking to people, running focus groups. And by the end of the year, we published something called Building Community. And what we said was the last thing the community needs is just having the university come in with programs. The community needs to rebuild and have more of a sense of community from everything we've heard, and they need to have the power to make that happen. Anything that we need to do needs to be part of a partnership. We need to see ourselves as partners with the community, not us going in telling them what they need. As a result of that report, there was an organization that was created called the Columbia Point Community Partnership. And it was intended to build on a lot of what Bernie had done. And it was a partnership with all the different organizations on Columbia Point contributing to it. Unfortunately, due to a lot of issues, it went under in around 2003. But the needs assessments kept pointing to the issues of youth. And in 2003, under the leadership of then Chancellor Motley, the university established something called the Harbor Point Apartment Community Memorandum of Agreement. And I see Charlie's smiling because Charlie took that on after Chancellor Motley when became chancellor. He was not chancellor then. And we identified all the issues in the community and the university that we could work on together. We had 10 points. We had a point person in the university. We had a point person in the community. We met once a month. We reported on what we were doing, and it included employment. It included research. It included education. It included youth programming, and it was incredibly exciting. So we have a history of doing things that really show our respect for the community, our need for each other, and our vision of being vibrant together. I just wanted, in the interest of time, to talk just a little bit about some of the projects that I've been working on. But I did want to mention that when we think about working with the community and when we think of meaningful engagement, we have to be strategic. We have to think about, why are we going in there? Who are we working with? Who invited us? Who else is there? Are we talking to them? Are we communicating them? What do we know about the community? We need to think about need. Whose needs are we meeting? Are we meeting the professors' needs to do more research, to get credit for service? Are we meeting the needs of our students to be more engaged citizens and to have better careers? Are we meeting the needs of youth and the organizations in the community? And I would submit, to be really good partners, we can and should be doing all those things. And then we always win. So we need to think about also our impact. Who do we want to impact? And when we think of need, we can also think of, how do we impact the community? How do we impact UMass students? How do we impact us as faculty and staff? And how do we impact the youth, particularly in the community? How are we growing together? I put together all sorts of things here that I'm not going to have chance to get to. Um, and then we need to think about how are we participating? You know, are we just having the community as a token partner? Do we talk to them? Do we know what's going on? When I first started to partner with the youth center and Gwennett Santos, it took 5 years for us to really learn to grow and trust each other. There's no one in the world that I respect more than Queenie. But it took years for her to respect me and for me to really understand her, because relationships take time. But if you believe it's important, you stick with it. And that's why even I always want students to be able to stay with a community project for years. And usually once they get in the community, they love it so much that they do just keep volunteering. But as a faculty member, all my programs have always enabled students to continue through different classes so they get to know the community better. They can still fulfill their academic obligations. So that as partners, we are really talking all the time. We meet once a week. There were times where I think I was spent more time at the youth center than I did on campus. We need to respect each other. We need to be committed to each other. And we need to believe that we're better together. So I would right now like to introduce Gwennett Santos, who is an amazing person. She grew up in Columbia Point. She is the site director at the Walter Denny Youth Center, which is part of the Boys and Girls Club of Dorchester. She has been recognized by numerous organizations for her leadership and her contributions. She's always there when there's a problem. When after Katrina, she was working with people who come up from New Orleans. And she's on the university's athletic advisory board as well as a number of others. So I will hand this over.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. So I just want to say thank you to Stephanie and DeMars and Joan and Charlie. Like, without that team, there would be no me at the other end of the street. So I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. So I grew up at Columbia Point along with Stephanie. I'm probably older than the university, which I know I am. It's funny, but it's crazy to say that. But growing up, like looking at the university, Charlie just mentioned a good point when he said that everything was facing inward. And every time we walk outside our doors, we see this just these bricks, nothing but bricks, but there was always a rainbow over the university, no matter what the weather was. Crazy. So as a kid, like, never really understood what it meant to be part of a university or a college, just went with the flow. Somebody said people went there after they left high school. I was like, oh, when I'm done with high school, I'm never going anywhere. Um, and I say that to say, there was many people from UMass that came in to just test people in the community, just do surveys, look at us, thought that we were not human enough for them, but we really were, as you can see us sitting here today. Charlie and Rodney, as a kid, I was a kid once before going in that gym, not for athletics, but I wouldn't act up either, but went in because it was very peaceful. It was a place that we can actually sit, have conversations. Our parents knew that we were safe, and then we go back across the street to whatever it was. I grew up in a family of 10 and a 3-bedroom at Columbia Point. 10 of us stayed together until we were like grown and out on our own. My mom still lives at Columbia Point, Harbor Point. It's still a part of me. That's my community, will always be my community. I fight for that community each and every day. As Joan mentioned, when we started our partnership almost 18 years ago, I was sent here from the Boys and Girls Clubs of Dorchester to start the youth center here on Mount Vernon Street. They were like, we got the building, you're going. I'm like, I'm going, like, and I was a kid in that building once before. That was our youth center. It was in a basement, then we moved to an actual building. So going back, I had no programs, had to develop everything. At that time, Rodney was worked for Charlie. I would call up Rodney, and I'd be like, just a minute, I just have something. He's like, it's not going to take you a minute, so I'm going to call you back. Because it was hours of conversation. Where can I bring my kids when it was raining? Where can my kids come and play, in order to be safe? Because as we look at Harbor Point, It's beautiful, it's grass, it's very nice, it's diverse, something that we always thirst for, but there's no real space for kids. There's no real place for kids to play. So the gym was like, I'm like, when you go in there, do not tear up any of those bleachers. Don't leave trash because we got to go back. It was like a whole new world to them to walk in to that gym. And just take a look at the university. We've done stuff with Joan where we've sat inside of the classrooms. The kids were able to talk and not be silent. Their voices were heard. Like, it's amazing. Most of our kids that we brought 17 years ago have now graduated college themselves. Some of them have had children, which are in my program. I hate to say how long I've been there, but I love that. Damaris was a part of my program back then. So when we serve as a university and a community, we're serving everyone because eventually we're going to be retiring and leaving, and this is it. This is who we have to funnel this through. And we want to make sure that our backs are not turned to the community that belongs to this university. You know, we had no way in except for Charlie and Rodney and Bernie. Bernie was the man. Like, he gave you your first jobs. He gave you your first everything around education, your first look inside of the university. I can remember when he brought us here for a tour, he said, they're going to be in class. You got to be silent. You know, we're all like, wow, this is better than school because they're able to just like sit there and talk to each other. But he gave us that greatness to let us know that we were somebody over in those bricks. Joan said it was a 5-year travel. Joan would say, oh, we're going to try this, we're going to try that. Joan comes to do tutoring with the students. The kids are hiding. No, I don't have homework. This went on for years, but she never gave up on that community. Never. Professor Blum, Joan came in one day like, oh, I have this idea. We're going to do philosophy. I'm like, it will not fly here. Never will it work. We're talking, how many years, Professor? 10 years strong. We're still in philosophy. It was Tuesday night. And it's amazing. So our young philosophers get to go to the commons and just kind of converse with people that are just walking around the commons in May, and they're junior philosophers. They get to have real conversations without arguments, without fights. Professor Blum, I can't say enough about this professor. He comes to us, sits, hangs out. When he walks in that door with that smile, my kids know that it's real. And we just want to say thank you for believing in those kids that live in that community. So philosophy is still going on. I didn't think it was going to work. Science club, we have, you know, confection connection where we have cooking classes. Most of my staff are students from the university. I'm so thankful. They come and they stay because they care. Some of them have been with me, freshmen to seniors and beyond. Um, so the relationship between the university and the community is critical. Um, in January, we were doing MLK celebrations, the university, Charlie's group. You know, Joan, we come together and we bring in the seniors from the senior home because they make up that community also. It's not just about the youth, it's about everyone that lives there. Look at Charlie. All of these kids are grown adults now. We've served them. We've done well, but we're not done yet because the university, we're looking for more. Everybody that knows me, they think that I work here at the university because I am always looking for something from the university. I'm like, yeah, I work there. They just haven't given me my badge yet, but it's soon to come. But we need this university like never before. It's nice for the younger kids to come on campus. We're talking our 6 and 7-year-olds to come and sit in these chairs, get them ready. Let's get them ready. And we can't do it ourselves. So, you know, anybody that's looking to do any service, we're down here, you know, on the block. We have a sign in front of the building that says Boys and Girls Clubs of Dorchester. I mean, we would love to have you. We cannot do this work without each other. I haven't been I haven't walked here in a while. I normally take the bus down. Today I walked, and it felt so good to see that sign in the front that says UMass Boston. We've never had anything facing us that said welcome. But today, I can tell you it felt good to walk through and just be like, yes, this is it. This is what we need. So now the kids can see it. I have a few kids that go here now, and they love it but they have to feel welcome. They have to trust. They have to believe that this is not just an experiment, that this is real. And there are humans that live over there. Some great people live in that community and the surrounding community. So I just want to say thank you for being able to pay it forward to my kids like Charlie did for us. And we say thank you from everybody here because we can't do it without each other. And we're learning that every day. So Joan, I know that we'll forever be, one day I'm hoping that we have a Boys and Girls Club inside of the university. That's my passion. Why not? Why not? So thank you all so, so much.
And thank you. I just wanted to show you a couple of slides, and I also want to thank Professor Jackie Lagerson, who's here, who was always also a part from different grants. One grant I had, we created a service learning outreach team slot. Jackie has always had her students engaged. She's always showed up. She's always been in there showing the respect, the commitment, and the perseverance that has made the partnerships great. And when we talk about some of the projects we did, this was HICCUP, the Healthy Initiative Collaborative Community University Partnership. And Damaris, when you talked about kids wanting recreation, the kids just said more than, they became community researchers. And they went out, they did interviews, they took pictures, they did all sorts of work, and they determined more than anything they wanted a basketball court. More than anything. They did fundraising. They spoke at conferences. They wrote grants. They presented to the task force, but they kept being turned down. But in early 2000s, we did we did partner with City Year, and we did a major day where we painted our logo on the courts at the McCormick Middle School. We cleaned up the whole area. We revitalized the basketball courts, and some of these youth, we still see all of them, but some of them have been in my classes and have come back and done service learning. So it's been very exciting. The youth have learned incredible skills. This one was part of a 5-year service learning class where new groups of students just kept coming in, but there were always enough who had been there before, who were just volunteering or who were building, so that they served as real partners and as role models, because many came from this community or similar communities. So they provided the vision, the support. We always got involved on Good Neighbor Day and did joint community cleanups. And then after that, I had, they always came to campus. I had gotten a grant from HUD, a community opportunity outreach partnership grant, and we were looking at what was being offered on campus and what was missing. We held a big needs assessment of every organization on and off campus that did any work with young people. And we wanted to see where were the gaps. We found out that Queenie was taking her youth to Stonehill College. Because they weren't getting tutoring. So I said, oh no, that won't do. So we started our first service learning class in tutoring. And that's when the youth would hide from us. But over the years, we've had amazing results. We had one of the first tutoring programs was actually in an apartment at Harbor Point, and then we moved entirely to the Denny. But the UMass students have found it incredibly impactful. This student over here now works at the Boys and Girls Club of Dorchester at the Savin Hill site, Joelle Figueroa. And we found that we've served at least 70, 80 youth a year in tutoring, in philosophy, in dance, in civic engagement, in Passport to Manhood, in girls groups, in art. So the university has been a win-win in those cases where the university students have gotten and given so much, the youth and the community have given us so much. So I think that was one of the last groups. So I think probably we should answer questions now and hear from you all what you have to say.
Sure. Well, one thing I would say is that it has been extremely frustrating when you're dealing with the tensions of rent increases at home and then going to school here, and then basically trying to advocate for the university that you're so proud to be part of. But also, you're dealing with, you know, tension in your even your relationship with your own mom because money is tight, right? And then you're working and then you're being part of all these things, and now I have the chance to travel, and I get like this imposter syndrome sometimes where I feel a little bit guilty about having these amazing opportunities and knowing that um the people that I've grown around may not have access to opportunities like that, either because they have other commitments, because they can't afford college, um, just various things, and I'm paying the same amount as anyone else here. I'm not getting any kind of funding to support my education here. So I think that that's a big piece to it as far as how I feel about my engagement on campus. Currently, right now, I'm a trip leader for Indigenous Women's Empowerment. We're going to Coban in Guatemala next month for 5 days doing service. And the reason of why I grew a passion for indigenous communities is because I see they are a marginalized community that I have empathy for because I come from a marginalized community, and how the response has been with the government, and just the superior groups like the Latinos in Guatemala, and how they don't see indigenous people as human beings. And I feel like when Queenie, you were talking about how you felt like growing up, when people were coming from the university doing research, that sometimes they treated you like as if you were not a human being. And I feel like that's me when I go to these case managers at the management office right over here, because they ask you for everything, and it's a terrible, terrible experience. Just 2 weeks ago, I did recertification, and I had to give them all of my information, if I have a savings account, if I'm working overtime, all my pay stubs, if I have a retirement plan, if I have any investments. They ask for every single thing. And my whole thing is that I'm a college student, and I'm trying to advance myself. And then I started to feel guilty that my mom has been dealing with this. She's a single mom, and when we moved here when I was 6 years old, it was like $500 for rent. Now she's paying close to 2,000. So, and this is for a two-bedroom, low income housing. There's You basically have to pay 30% of your income. That doesn't equate to how the city is getting more and more expensive to live here. So that 30% is not feasible for someone to afford the rent. Um, and my whole thing is that even in terms of Harbor Point, I almost don't see the community now because, one, I'm not part of the Boys and Girls Club anymore. Plus, I want to mention that was my first job. But I feel like I'm not part of a community there because now I'm engaged here at UMass Boston, and then all the people I grew up with don't live there anymore. It's gotten too expensive. All of my friends, every single person that I was neighbors with were black and brown people, but also there was other diversity beyond that. There was Cambodians, there was Irish, there was all of these different communities, and it was a beautiful thing growing up because we felt so safe and we felt so privileged to live in such a beautiful community. And I remember when I started realizing there was UMass Boston here, we just thought it was buildings. We just thought we didn't know what it was, and we weren't supposed to go that far anyway. We would just stay in like our backyard, and our moms would yell at us like, "Where are you? Where are you?" And so I remember when I realized, okay, that's a school, I was like, huh, how can I how can I start going there? Is there any programs for me? Is there an open gym, which I realized like until I applied for this school that there was, how can I be involved with this university? And I just felt like I was an outsider almost. Like I didn't belong there. And if I wasn't an athlete, if I wasn't super smart, then maybe I wouldn't even be able to go to school. In general, like I've always felt like I was different from other people. So I knew that being an athlete or being super smart, that wasn't something that I was. And so I basically started doing my own art. And art is like an expression for me that I'm able to really portray my story and my identity. So that's why I was so thankful when I was part of the Boys and Girls Club because I would always interact with all the art teachers from when I was little and until I started working there. And I actually volunteered there before I got a job there. So as far as engagement, it's always been it's always been hard because I'm very passionate about the work that I do on campus, but at the same time, I get very exhausted easily because I'm like, how can I be doing all of this, but at the same time, because of this because of this relationship that I'm in with this school and then where I live, I'm not able to prosper in the way that I want to. And that comes into my classes, feeling tired, feeling depressed, where I miss class, having to work more hours than I need to just to afford. I pay all of my bills. So that's why I'm so thankful for you, Pingadu, because I feel like as a professor, and even you, Jacqueline, because you've always understood where I was coming from. And if I emailed you and I said maybe I couldn't come to class, or if I had a conversation with you, you were there. And I feel like it's really the faculty that really are the people who push on these initiatives to happen in communities throughout Boston in general. So.
I just want to say one thing. Like 45 years ago, it seems like, I mean, such a long time ago, but I can remember playing jump rope in the middle of the street because cars didn't come this way to go to UMass. They only went down Marcy Boulevard because that was the safe route back then. Now, my kids are almost getting hit by a car every day when they're getting off the school buses, which is really hard. But I noticed that when these cars are flying past, they're coming right into UMass. So in each, class that you're teaching, or if students, could you please just tell other students to just, slow down a little bit, from that 2:30 until 5:30 time because it's getting very deadly out there now. We've talked to the city about it. It's hard. I can remember a jump rope and you really didn't have to move that quick back then. But now you can't even get across the street quick enough before, and they're always coming through the gate, which is, might be good for the university for them to get here, but hard for our community to keep our kids safe. So I just wanted to throw that in. Any more questions?
One thing I'm thinking of as you're saying that is I feel like that's almost a symbolism of kind of how this university is moving right now. I remember doing the same thing as a child. Like we used to play football right in the street, and now with the gentrification that's going on at Harbor Point, it's almost like we don't have any kind of space. And then if we're out there, security is being called on us, or we're being too loud, or this. I mean, I remember growing up, there used to be parties on the street. Like I would always hear the Puerto Ricans like having their barbecues, and then everybody just running around and everything. And now it's like, it just doesn't feel like we feel out of place even though we grew up in this area. And one thing I thought was really interesting from what you were saying as far as growing up in Columbia Point is that I have similar experiences of what it was like. And I thought it would be so different because Columbia Point are considered the projects and Harbor Point are considered luxury apartments, but the experiences are still the same. And I think maybe that might be because of the fact that um, Boston is changing, but it also has this history that's so embedded, and it's not really going to go away that easily.
How many faculty members are in the room? Okay, so one of the things we've heard today is how Columbia Point has transitioned into Harbor Point, how the university has transitioned from a prison-like environment for the people outside, not welcome here, to opening and welcoming, and the gentrification that's going on. That's not going to stop. One of the big pieces we had on this campus, in my opinion, that really made a difference for our university was CPCS. We no longer have it. Right? Made a huge difference in this city to people. I remember CPCS when they were downtown and I was working for ABCD, and how important CPCS was to the city of Boston. There are people fighting to save our institutes. The institutes on this campus are the window that people have, ethnic groups, others, to this institution. It's our way to reach out and support and help people in the city. This is UMass Boston. Part of what happened here over the last 11 years is that Chancellor Motley had a grand vision. He had a grand vision to move this to a great research institution with a teaching soul that maintained its community identity and its roots in this community. And I think that all of us who are part of this staff and faculty on this campus who believe in what this university was created to be have an obligation to sort of stay the course, to hold people's feet to the fire, and to not lose the identity of this campus. What a shame that will be. And I'm not talking about for the campus, I'm talking about for the city. This is a great natural resource for this city. There are a number of people in this city, business people, money people, who believe this campus has an important, you may have heard, we just brought $5 million to this campus for a sports leadership program that was given by Jim Davis, who is the head of New Balance. He founded New Balance, he owns it. It's the only non-publicly held international apparel company. Jim and I have been friends for over 20 years. And he did it because he believes in this institution. He's been fighting for diversity in his business. And so we had a conversation with him. Well, it's hard, man. We can't find, no, I don't want to hear you can't find people. They're out there. The diversity's out there. So he understands what this campus means and how diverse we are. He made that investment. That's not all altruism. He's looking to get he's looking to get staff. He's looking to get staff that can work in his business and impact other sports businesses in the city. Diverse staff. We have an advisory board that is a virtual who's who in the sports community in Boston. Every president of every pro sports team is on our advisory board. We have agents, sports agents. We have leaders in the industry, be it apparel, whether it's the playing industry, the collegiate industry, the legal sports industry, because they know how important this university is to their future and their companies. We have to stay that course. And, to me, it's not about an aggressive, in-your-face fight. It's about doing our jobs and reminding people every opportunity we get of what the original mission of this campus was and who we are. That's what it's about. And the more of us who do that every single day, the greater the chance that this institution will survive itself and what's happening in terms of development and gentrification and all the other things that are going on. This university has to stay accessible for people in the city. That's why it was put here. There are dangers afloat. There's no doubt in my mind about that. So I don't want to really get on a pedestal. I'm actually a very, very, very proud past resident of Columbia Point, not Harbor Point, Columbia Point, because when I lived there, I lived on Monticello Ave, which is now Oyster Bay Road. See? Yeah, it's gone. And I'm also an extremely proud graduate of the Boston Public School Systems, and we're doing some work in the Boston Public School Systems to try to have an impact there. There are going to be some things that you will hear very, very soon. They're going to have a major impact on this campus and this peninsula, notwithstanding what's happening at the Dever School will be a part of that. And also a part of that will be the redevelopment of Joe Moakley Park and Qasim Beach. The last open waterfront space in this city for recreation is now in a visioning mode. And it's going to be spectacular what's going to happen there. Who's it going to happen for? We all have to keep vigilance on all the things that are going on in the city. Thank you, Professor, for this opportunity today. Thank you for pulling the people in. I'm going to run home now because sometimes my passion runs away with me, and I will. You know, my wife used to say all the time, "Don't give him a microphone. Whatever you do." And every time I got ready to speak, she would say, "Are you ready?" I said, "I'm ready." She said, "Sweetie, you know what I want? I want you to be good, be quick, and then be gone." Thank you.
And I think, you know, what you've all just said really underscores a lot of what we should be if we're really in, of, with, and for the community. We have to recognize that we do not have a monopoly on expertise. We do not have a monopoly on the knowledge, that our communities are rich with knowledge, rich with experience, and when we share and we work together, we're all really enhanced. Our research, our service, our teaching, and ourselves as citizens. 2010, the crucible moment was a report commissioned by the Federal Department of Education, and it said we need to train students not just to be good in their careers, but to be good citizens. Otherwise, democracy is really at stake. And we have to realize, and Damaris, as you're saying, what our students bring, we need to find ways to make them be able to thrive and to provide opportunities for their experiences in their communities to be recognized for the knowledge it brings, to be able to build on it. So when a professor has something where a student is designing a dance program, I was thinking, I got to talk with you and you, because we got to put that out in the schools. We got to make sure, we got to provide opportunities for you to be able to teach it there. So there's lots of ways when we communicate, when we're strategic, when we plan together, that we can make those things happen. And I would say, as we end, from my perspective, when we talk about good engagement, we can't be individual entrepreneurs. When we're only just out for ourselves and our own reputations and our own grants and our own, merit raises, we lose. The university loses, the community loses, the students lose. There are ways that we can really thrive and that we can be models when we really communicate, work together, and cross borders and boundaries and not see them there. So, is there any other comments, thoughts? Thank you all.